war, Washburn Crosby put together this little pamphlet called Your Share, and it was for homemakers with advice about nutrition when you're on ration food, how to make the most of ration food. It included things like, here's a page that has sandwich ideas if you're putting together a lunchbox for someone who's working during the war, or at the bottom there are actually menu ideas for a good lunch made out of rationed products. One of my favorites was a recipe for emergency steak. You could make a mock steak by mixing together ground beef with some Wheaties and onions, pat it into the shape of a T-bone steak, and you can kind of make veins out of strips of carrots and broil it. So you could take 1 pound of ground beef and stretch it into mock steak that would serve 6 people. Altogether during the war, about 7 million copies of this wartime booklet were distributed. By the middle of the 1940s, Betty Crocker was at the height of her popularity. She was getting about 5,000 letters a day. She was said to be the second most recognized woman in the world, behind only Eleanor Roosevelt, that other famous first lady. Surveys showed that if you asked 100 homemakers if they recognized the name Betty Crocker, 99 of them would say yes, 9 out of 10. And then it nearly all came to an end. Fortune magazine, in their April 1945 issue, ran an article about Betty Crocker. They started out with praise. They were noting that she was the second most recognized woman in the world. They said what FDR had done for politics, Betty had done for commerce. And then this article outed Betty Crocker as a fake, as a fraud. They announced to the world that Betty Crocker was not a real person, just a made-up name. So is this going to be the end of Betty Crocker? Not at all. The Fortune magazine article didn't really hurt Betty Crocker's popularity, partly because in what we probably today would say is a truism of corporate branding, Betty Crocker didn't really need to be real. She was fulfilling a very real need among American housewives. She was giving women a sense that their work was important, it was valued, she was providing advice, she was alleviating fears, reassuring homemakers that they could do it. As long as she was there to dish out helpful advice and provide well-tested recipes, she was needed and she was beloved by millions. Now, saying Betty Crocker wasn't real is not the same as saying that Betty Crocker didn't have a face. And I showed you this ad before, and you can see there actually is a face of Betty Crocker. Now, there's never been a photograph of Betty Crocker. She's not a real person you can take a photograph of. But that portrait was appearing as early as the mid-1930s, and it was always a brunette woman with sort of perfectly coiffed hair and wearing her signature red and white outfit. She was appearing in ads by the mid-30s. She was appearing on the covers of pamphlets. This is my copy of a very early edition of the Betty Crocker Picture Cookie book. The cover is torn there. I wanted to show you this because fun cocktail party trivia. This is one of the few images of Betty Crocker that you will ever see where she's wearing anything but red and white. This is a rare image of Betty Crocker wearing green. So clearly there are images of her. Where are these coming from? Well, the very first image of Betty Crocker was done in 1936. You can see on this image the signature of the artist. This was created by an artist named Nasa McMain, and it actually was a composite. She said that she blended together the facial features of female staffers at Washburn Crosby's home service department, which made sense because those were the women who had a collective hand in Betty Crocker's success. That portrait of Betty Crocker would be used for more than 20 years, longer than any other single Betty Crocker portrait. By the way, don't you love this ad? If you can't read it, it says, Betty Crocker's cake mix secrets help husbands beat wives in cake baking contests from coast to coast. I don't think you could get away with that today. But she didn't last forever. Betty Crocker has had a couple of updates. In fact, she's had 7 updates. The first one was in 1955 when she was depicted as a kind of smiling grandmotherly character. Can you see she's got those gray streaks in her hair? She's aged a bit. This is one of the few Betty Crocker portraits where she's got an open mouth smile. She's very friendly. She's your trusted advisor. In 1965, she had a couple of years lopped off. She got a new, younger look with a very bouffant 1960s hairdo. Some people say this one looks a little bit like a mix between Jackie Kennedy and Lady Bird Johnson. In 1972, she got another update. She's had periodic changes. Notice how she's always wearing red and white, and she usually has brunette hair and blue eyes. Here's the 1980 version. One magazine said, it's funny how over the decades she changes, but she never seems to age. She's sort of always in the mid-30s. Here's the 1986 version. The most important update might have been in 1996. This is when painter John Stuart Ingle gave her olive skin that could belong to a number of different ethnicities. She looks kind of Caucasian, but she could also be a little bit Hispanic, maybe a little bit Native American, or even Asian. Most images up to this point I mentioned had had blue eyes. This one very distinctly has brown eyes. Ingle created this portrait by digitally morphing portraits of 75 women, photographs, chosen from a field of about 5,000 women that General Mills had decided embodied the characteristics of Betty Crocker. It was a big deal when this composite debuted. So over the years, you can see Betty Crocker has kind of kept up with the times by evolving. But I think it points to a larger issue. One of the keys to Betty Crocker's long-running success, and she's been around since 1921, so this is about 100 years, it's been the company's ability to evolve. And the evolution of her look is only one small part of that. The look has changed to embody bigger qualities of Betty Crocker that we associate with her, whether she's a grandmotherly dispenser of advice or a businesswoman with kind of professional expertise. The effort to keep Betty Crocker current means she has evolved in many ways over the years. Here's a good example. In 1951, Washburn Crosby decided to make Betty a living, breathing person. They hired this woman, Adelaide Hawley, to act as Betty Crocker on a television show. Hawley actually privately admitted she really wasn't much of a cook and she didn't know much about baking at all. But what she did have was this warm, charismatic personality, and she'd had experience as a public speaker. You can see her in this photograph on her earlier radio television. Hawley became the first of a number of women who played Betty Crocker on television. Let me see if I can play the very first episode of the Betty Crocker television show.
Hello, everybody.
This is Betty Crocker introducing herself.
A warm welcome to our Betty Crocker kitchen.
She's announcing that this is bringing Betty Crocker into your world, and she'll be giving you a tour of what's happening in the Betty Crocker kitchens. Doesn't she look like every woman's mother? And this is the tour of the different kitchens that they use. This was the photography kitchen, one of many.
It has sunny yellow walls, white cupboards, sinks of stainless steel. This is what we call the kitchen of tomorrow, because it's where our work for the future gets it.
Well, I'm going to move on from that. Ultimately, as fun as it is to see Betty Crocker on television, she didn't last for very long. This is actually an episode, you might recognize these two. This is George Burns and Gracie Allen. Over time, the Betty Crocker show didn't really work. Most of their efforts to do that flopped. But where Betty Crocker did work as kind of a sponsor of television programs. This is from an episode where Betty Crocker teaches Gracie Allen how to bake a cake using a Betty Crocker cake mix. And it seemed to work better as that kind of little commercials inserted into larger television programs. It's actually one interesting comment. There was a historian who pointed out that not only was Betty Crocker better as a spokesperson, she actually was perfect to be a spokesperson for George Burns and Gracie Allen, because Gracie Allen, like Betty Crocker, was sort of partly a real person and partly a completely made up character, and they sort of seem to go together in a funny way. But even though she didn't really turn out a success on television, Betty did keep changing with the times. In 1954, the Betty Crocker search for the All-American Homemaker of Tomorrow was launched. That continued until 1977. You might even know someone, or you yourself might have been one of those high school seniors competing for scholarships and awards based on your knowledge of cooking technology. This was a 1950s test. The corporate kitchens were continuously updated to represent the latest in cooking technology. Now, I mentioned Betty Crocker cake mixes. They were not the very first Betty Crocker grocery product, though. The very first was soup mix. Betty Crocker soup mixes debuted in 1941. They didn't turn out to be a big hit. But the Betty Crocker cake mixes definitely was. This is an image from a very early television commercial for Betty Crocker cake mixes. They debuted in 1947, but Betty Crocker was not the first company to have a cake mix. There had been others. And they weren't even the very first to recognize that removing powdered eggs from the mix helped sales. When you asked homemakers to add in their own fresh eggs, sales tended to increase. There actually was a company named P. Duff and Sons that got a patent for a cake mix requiring fresh eggs in 1935, and they said it's because we know homemakers think they're doing more if they're adding in their fresh eggs. But still, we remember Betty Crocker cake mixes today as being part of the recognition of that psychological issue, that women wanted to feel more involved in the creative process. A housewife felt prouder of her cake if she had to put in a little bit of effort, adding her own eggs. This is actually sometimes called by business historians today the IKEA effect. It's that idea that if there's something that you had to put effort in, if it's something you had to make or construct yourself, you tend to value it a little more highly. So let me play for you a 1950 cake mix commercial, which actually emphasizes the importance of adding in your own eggs.
A fresh egg cake or a cake made with dried eggs? Or higher, lighter, tastier cake? Why, fresh eggs, of course. But remember, all cake mixes are not alike. Betty Crocker cake mixes are different. They call for your eggs, added by you at home. It's the only national cake mix brand that lets you add the eggs. There's a reason why there are no dried egg whites, no dried egg yolks in Betty Crocker cake mixes. When you add the eggs, you're sure to get finer cakes most consistently. 9 out of 10 homemakers in recent tests said Betty Crocker cake mixes gave them bigger, taller cakes than the dried egg cake mixes they tested. Yes, and better tasting cakes, too. Try Betty Crocker Party Cake Mix for yellow, white, or spice cakes. And try Betty Crocker Chocolate Devil's Food Cake Mix for rich, moist devil's food with genuine fresh egg goodness. Get Betty Crocker Cake Mixes today.
Now, you might have noticed that they mentioned adding the eggs, but did you also notice that in that commercial, there's no Betty Crocker? She herself does not appear, and there's actually no baker at all. The only part of the baker that you see are actually her hands doing the stirring and things. The baker, is kind of nameless, faceless. The character who is fully realized is the man, presumably a husband, who just loves eating his slice of Betty Crocker cake. And that's telling, because with the mixes, what disappeared was any sense that the cook's accomplishments deserved recognition. It takes no skill to come up with a Betty Crocker yellow cake or spice cake or devil's food cake. You mix eggs into the mix, you stick it in the oven, it's foolproof, it's great, cake after cake after cake. there were two selling points for the early mixes. One was that the product itself would taste delicious, addressing the obvious fear people had about using a mix compared to home baking. But the other one is that it's the modern way to cook. It's easy, it's fast, it's foolproof. If you really want to be modern, you want to be baking your cakes the foolproof way, and they're going to turn out deliciously. But that's not to say that the skillful cook ever disappeared. In 1950, the company launched the very first version of the cookbook that was going to make all types of cooking and baking simple and easy and fast for cooks. And that was the first edition of the Betty Crocker Picture Cookbook. It debuted with an unprecedented printing of 950,000. That was just the first printing of the first edition. It has become so beloved that it's actually been nicknamed Big Red because of that really distinctive red cover it's got. What made this book so beloved is it featured approachable recipes for everyday standards. Things like what you see here, boiled eggs, or macaroni and cheese, or meatloaf. This is actually, she has a great meatloaf recipe. Or no-fail chocolate chip cookies. This is actually a photograph of chocolate chip cookies that I made using the Betty Crocker chocolate chip cookie recipe. And they always said these recipes were triple tested. They were solicited from cooks who had already perfected them. Then the Betty Crocker staff tweaked them, worked on them, got them really perfect. Then they sent them out to other home cooks to see if they could do it. So the recipes were clear, well tested, as close to guaranteed to work as you can get. But it wasn't just the recipes that made this cookbook great. Sorry, I shouldn't have left this image up. Isn't your mouth watering? What made this cookbook great was also, it was one of the first cookbooks to feature illustrations. Not just photographs of the finished products, but photo series like this one, step-by-step procedures. If you'd never made an angel food cake, well, here it is, all laid out, how to separate the eggs, how to beat the egg whites, how to fold it in, and on and on and on. It's all in there. And it's not just how to make an angel food cake. It's got instructions, how to frost a cake, what to serve to a sick child, how to budget your weekly income for food. It was like a home economics class in a book. And for women who didn't have a mother or grandmother or an aunt nearby to teach them how to cook, this was everything you needed to know. When you look through the first edition from 1950, you can see a lot of the foods are very 1950s. There's a lot of gelatin-based recipes. Anyone remember tomato aspic? There's a lot of gelatin salads. There's a lot of ham loaves. But the Betty Crocker cookbook kept evolving. This is the one with this Mondrian-style pink and blue and yellow and white cover. This was the edition first published in 1961. This one, by the way, tends to be the most sought after by collectors, possibly because it's the one that most baby boomers today have nostalgic memories about. The 1969 version had this kind of pie-shaped montage of cover photos. It's sometimes called the red pie version of the Betty Crocker cookbook. But the original, the 1950 edition, was such a massive success that they published a facsimile edition in 1998. Both of them came, by the way, in both ring-bound and flat-bound covers. This facsimile came with a front note that said, you know, eating habits have changed a lot since 1950s, but these fond memories of cooking and eating the recipes from this book and sharing the recipes with your mother have now become so embedded in American popular culture that people have asked for it. So now baby boomer constituents who want to get their own recipes for those nostalgia foods that they remember from their childhood can now get them. They can get their recipes for things like pink azalea cake and daffodil cake, or that tomato aspic. If you really, really got to make it, here's your recipe. And I want to finish up by just saying, if you're inspired now maybe to take out your edition of the Betty Crocker Picture Cookbook, or maybe just pick up a Betty Crocker cake mix next time you're out, take a moment and think about the incredible history of this brand. And it all started with a puzzle and a sack of flour. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.